My name is Gloria Morrison, and this is the story of how I was humiliated, dismissed, and underestimated until the moment I finally stopped shrinking myself to fit someone else's comfort. Looking back now, I can see the red flags everywhere. At the time, though, they didn't look like warnings. They looked like little things. Comments that stung but were easy to laugh off. Jokes that landed a second too late. Moments that made me feel smaller but not small enough to leave. My boyfriend Frank had been doing it for months. Quietly. Consistently. Like erosion. It started with his friends. The first time I met them properly was at a work happy hour his company hosted. I remember standing outside the bar for a second, smoothing my jacket, reminding myself to smile. I wanted to make a good impression. I always did. Frank's friends, Megan, Lauren, and Chloe were already there, cocktails in hand, dressed like they'd stepped out of a lifestyle magazine. Megan spotted me first. "Oh, you must be Gloria. Frank's told us so much about you." She smiled sweetly, then added, "Good things, I hope. He says you're very stable." The word landed wrong, not warm, not complimentary, more like a diagnosis. When someone asked what I did for work, I opened my mouth to answer, but Frank cut in smoothly. "She does tech stuff. Software. Honestly, I don't really understand it." He laughed. His friends laughed with him. "Software engineering," I corrected gently. "Back-end systems." Frank touched my arm. "She gets so technical. It's adorable." Adorable. Like I was a child explaining a crayon drawing. I swallowed it. They weren't tech people. They didn't need to understand. Still something twisted in my chest and stayed there. The money comments came next. We'd been talking about taking a vacation, and I'd suggested we save a little more first. Frank rolled his eyes. "You're always worried about money," he said. "Relax. We're fine. I'm just trying to be responsible." "You make decent money," he said casually. "I make more. Between us, we're doing great." There it was, casual, sharp. Yes, he made more, about $90,000 a year, plus commission. What he didn't mention was that he hadn't paid rent once in the year he'd been living in my apartment, or that I covered utilities, groceries, everything, while he tossed in $200 when he remembered. "I pay for the apartment," I said quietly. And I appreciate that he replied, smiling like I was being difficult. "But come on, Gloria, you're not struggling, you're just careful." Careful. The reason the lights stayed on. The reason there was savings at all. I let it go. That was my biggest mistake. The night everything cracked was the dinner party. Frank had asked me to cook. He always did when his friends came over. "You're actually good at it," he liked to say. I'm not. I spent 2 hours making salmon roasted vegetables and fresh pasta while he tried on outfits and adjusted his hair. His friends arrived right on time, perfectly styled. "Gloria's playing chef tonight," Megan announced. "Yeah," Frank said, laughing. "She's useful for that." Dinner started politely enough. They talked about brand deals, influencer drama, a Miami trip I couldn't afford because I was paying for an apartment I barely lived in alone. Then Chloe turned to Frank. "So did you close that luxury car deal?" "Almost," he said. $200,000 contract. They praised him. Then Megan looked at me. "What about you, Gloria?" "Still doing the computer thing." "Software engineering," I said. "Actually, I just got offered a senior position." Frank cut in fast. "She's thinking about moving for it. To Texas." He laughed. "Like that's going to happen." The table went quiet. "Triple her current salary," I added softly. "How much do you make now?" Chloe asked. "About $68,000. She laughed. Frank smiled. "I make more than her," he said proudly, "which is why the whole Texas thing is ridiculous. I'm kind of the breadwinner." Something snapped. "You don't pay rent," I said. Silence. Total. Frank's smile vanished. "Excuse me. I cover the apartment. Utilities. Groceries. You contribute maybe $200 a month." His face burned red. "Are you seriously doing this in front of my friends?" "I'm stating facts." "No," he snapped. "You're embarrassing me." Then he turned to them. "If she's so unhappy, she should leave. Go to Texas, take her little job offer, and see how far she gets without me." "Without you." He leaned back, arms crossed. "Leave if you want. You'll be back begging within a month." I stood up. "Start counting." And for the first time, I meant it. I didn't slam the door when I left that night. I didn't cry in the hallway or scream back at Frank while his friends pretended not to stare. I picked up my bag, walked past the table where the food I'd cooked was already going cold, and stepped out into the night like I'd rehearsed it 1,000 times in my head. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears, but my hands were steady, and that scared me more than the anger ever could have. Calm, I was learning, usually came right after something inside you finally died. I drove without music, the city lights blurring past the windshield, while Frank's words replayed over and over each time, stripping away another layer of illusion. "You'll be back begging." He had said it so confidently, like he'd already seen the ending, and I was just playing my part. I pulled into a hotel parking lot I'd never been to before, checked in under my own name, and sat on the edge of the bed for nearly 20 minutes without moving. No scrolling, no texting friends, no calling anyone to tell them what happened. Just silence and the low hum of the air conditioner while the truth settled in. If I went back now, nothing would change. This was the fork in the road, and I could feel it in my bones. I opened my laptop and stared at the email I'd been afraid to open all evening. The subject line still made my chest tighten: Senior Software Engineer Offer, Austin. 2 weeks to decide. Frank had dismissed it like a phase, something I'd grow out of by morning. I hovered over the reply button, thinking of every dinner I'd cooked, every bill I'd paid quietly, every time I'd swallowed a comment so he could shine. Then I typed 3 words that felt heavier than anything I'd ever written before I accept the offer. The response came faster than I expected. 15 minutes. They were excited. They asked about start dates. They mentioned relocation support like it was nothing, like my life could really just move. When I closed the laptop, my hands were shaking again, but this time it wasn't fear. It was adrenaline. It was the realization that I'd just chosen myself without asking permission. The next morning, I went back to the apartment while Frank was out with his friends, probably laughing about how dramatic I'd been, probably assuming I'd cool off and come home apologizing. I moved through the rooms quietly, methodically, like I was packing up someone else's life. Clothes, laptop documents, toiletries, only what I needed. I left behind the things that had always been more his than mine. The couch he loved, the framed photos where I stood slightly behind him. I wrote a note and placed it on the kitchen counter right where he'd see it first. I took the job. I'm moving to Austin in 2 weeks. The lease is in my name. You have 30 days to find a new place. I'll cover this month's rent so you have time. After that, you're on your own. No insults, no explanations, just facts. The same thing he'd accused me of being petty for the night before. I left my key beside the note and walked out without looking back. Frank called 6 times that afternoon. I didn't answer. He texted that I was throwing a tantrum over one dinner, that I was being dramatic, that his friends thought I'd lost my mind. I replied once, not a tantrum, a decision. And then I blocked his number. He tried from Megan's phone, then Lauren's, then an email, each one more frantic than the last, like he was slowly realizing the ground under him wasn't solid anymore. 2 days later, he showed up at my office. Security called my desk. There's a Frank here asking for you. I'm in a meeting, I said. If he doesn't leave, file a harassment report. He left. The next 2 weeks blurred together in a way I'd never experienced before. I gave notice at work. My manager was surprised, disappointed, but kind. My team took me out for lunch, told me they'd miss me, told me I was good at what I did. It felt strange hearing that without a joke attached, without someone rolling their eyes. I realized how long it had been since anyone had said something like that to me and meant it. Frank didn't stop trying. He got his mother to call. She said I was being cruel, that he'd made a mistake, that relationships required forgiveness. I told her he had 30 days. She said I'd regret this when I was alone in a new city. Maybe I would. But I'd rather be lonely on my own terms than small on someone else's. By the time the moving truck pulled away, I felt hollowed out and lighter all at once, like I'd torn out something rotten and was waiting to see what grew back in its place. As the city disappeared behind me, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt resolved. Frank had told me to start counting. What he didn't understand was that I already had. The distance didn't soften things the way people like to pretend it does. It sharpened them. Every mile between me and my old life seemed to strip away another excuse I'd been using to justify staying so long. By the time I reached Austin, I wasn't numb anymore. I was awake, painfully so, and suddenly aware of how much emotional labor I'd been carrying without ever being thanked for it. Frank unraveled faster than I expected. At first it was anger, texts from new numbers that swung wildly between accusations and nostalgia. You blindsided me. You owe me a conversation, after everything we've been through. He left voicemails too, his voice tight and controlled at first, like he still believed he could talk me back into place. Then the cracks started to show. His words lost their polish. He asked questions he already knew the answers to. Where are you staying? Are you really starting the job? Are you actually doing this? I didn't respond. The silence bothered him more than anything I could have said. I'd spent years explaining myself to him, translating my feelings into something small enough not to threaten his. Now there was nothing to push against, no argument to win, just absence. About a week after I left, I heard through a mutual friend that Frank had moved out of the apartment early. Not because he wanted to, but because he couldn't stand being there alone. He crashed on Megan's couch for a few nights before her patience wore thin. Apparently, it wasn't so charming when the guy who'd always had dinner cooked for him suddenly expected emotional support and free housing in return. Funny how quickly generosity dries up when it's no longer one-sided. At work, things got worse for him. The same confidence that had made him loud and impressive at dinner parties turned brittle under pressure. Deals stalled. Deadlines slipped. Without me quietly organizing his schedule, reminding him of calls, smoothing over his moods when he was stressed, he started missing things. Small things at first, then bigger ones. He blamed everyone but himself. I didn't hear any of this directly. I didn't need to. The pattern was familiar. I'd lived inside it. Meanwhile, my own life was shifting in ways that felt almost surreal. My new apartment was smaller than the old one, but every inch of it was mine. No compromises. No waiting to see if someone else approved. I unpacked slowly, deliberately, placing things where I wanted them. The quiet didn't feel empty. It felt clean. On my first day at the new job, my manager walked me through the office, introducing me to the team like I belonged there. No one made jokes about my work being adorable. No one interrupted me when I spoke. During my first meeting, I suggested an approach to a back-end issue they'd been struggling with for weeks, and the room actually listened. Someone nodded. Someone took notes. When the meeting ended, my manager pulled me aside and said, "We're really glad you're here." I had to blink a few times before I trusted my voice enough to answer. Back home, Frank tried one last angle, mutual sympathy. He started telling people I'd abandoned him for money, that I'd chosen a job over love, that I'd changed. Some believed him. Most didn't. It's hard to sell yourself as the victim when the other person quietly packed their things, paid your rent, and left without making a scene. The truth has a way of leaking out, especially when you've burned the people who used to cover for you. By the end of the month, he'd moved back in with his parents. I imagined him in his old childhood bedroom, surrounded by trophies from a version of himself that hadn't existed in years, and felt a brief sharp pang of something like guilt. It passed quickly. Guilt, I was learning, was just another habit I didn't need anymore. I didn't feel victorious. I felt grounded. The consequences weren't something I'd engineered or celebrated. They were simply the natural result of removing myself from a role I'd been playing too long. Frank had told me I was too careful, too stable, too boring to survive on my own. What he hadn't considered was that stability, when it belongs to you, is power. And for the first time in a long while, that power was entirely mine. Austin didn't feel like an escape. It felt like a reset. The first thing I noticed was how light everything felt without constant tension humming under the surface. I wasn't bracing myself before opening the door at night. I wasn't measuring my words, rehearsing explanations, or anticipating the subtle disappointment that used to live in Frank's silences. The quiet in my new apartment wasn't lonely. It was spacious, like a room finally cleared of furniture that never belonged to me in the first place. Work became the anchor I didn't know I needed. The pace was demanding, but it was honest. When something broke, we fixed it. When someone had an idea, it was tested on its merits, not on how impressive they sounded saying it out loud. For the first time in my career, I felt like my competence was enough on its own. I wasn't someone's support system or backup plan. I was an engineer, full stop. My first paycheck hit 2 weeks in. I stared at the number longer than I probably should have, more than I used to make in an entire month. I didn't feel giddy or reckless. I felt steady. I bought a real desk instead of working off the kitchen table. I upgraded my mattress. I hung art on the walls that I liked without worrying if someone else thought it was boring or too serious. Every purchase felt like a quiet vote of confidence in myself. Outside of work, life began to expand in ways I hadn't planned. A coworker invited me to a climbing gym. I almost said no. Out of habit, the old reflex that told me not to take up space, not to inconvenience anyone. Then I remembered I didn't need permission anymore. I went. I was terrible at it, laughed at myself, and left with sore arms and 3 new phone numbers. Nobody teased me for being awkward. Nobody implied I needed someone else to be interesting. They just accepted me. Through mutual friends back home, updates about Frank filtered in whether I wanted them or not. He'd officially moved back with his parents. His friends had stopped inviting him out as often. Apparently, the story he'd told about me choosing money over love didn't land the way he expected. People remembered the dinner party. They remembered the way he'd spoken to me. Without me there to absorb the discomfort and smooth things over, the memory stuck. I didn't feel satisfaction hearing that. What I felt was distance. Emotional, mental, geographic distance. Like watching an old show you used to be obsessed with and realizing you'd outgrown it. Some nights I caught myself waiting for the other shoe to drop, waiting for the regret Frank promised me, the loneliness he was so sure would follow. But instead there were invitations, meetups, team dinners, weekend plans. There was the steady rhythm of work that challenged me without draining me. There was the simple relief of not being underestimated in my own home. I started to see the relationship more clearly, not through anger, but through contrast. Frank hadn't just belittled my career, he'd needed to. My growth threatened the version of himself he liked best, the one where he was the star, and I was the supporting character, quietly holding everything together behind the scenes. When I stepped out of that role, his world wobbled. Mine didn't. I didn't miss him. I missed the idea of being chosen, of being valued, but I was learning that those things weren't something someone else granted you. They were something you built brick by brick once you stopped handing the materials away. By the time the first month in Austin ended, I wasn't counting days anymore. I wasn't measuring time by how long it had been since I left, or how long until I might regret it. I was living inside a version of myself that felt unfamiliar and solid at the same time, and somewhere in the back of my mind, I knew this wasn't the end of the story. It was just the part where I stopped shrinking. I didn't go looking for news about Frank, but it found me anyway. It came in fragments at first, dropped casually by people who didn't realize how carefully I listened. A mutual friend mentioned that he'd taken time off work, just stressed, she said, though her tone suggested something more. Another hinted that his big confidence had started to sound more like defensiveness lately. Then there were the quieter details, the ones that slipped out when no one thought they mattered. He was staying with his parents longer than planned. He was arguing with people who used to let things slide. He was angry in a way that made rooms uncomfortable. Without me there to absorb his moods, Frank didn't know where to put them. The real shift came when one of his coworkers reached out to me, not to ask questions, but to apologize. She said she hadn't realized how much I'd done behind the scenes until I was gone. How I'd been the one reminding Frank of deadlines, proofreading emails, calming him down before meetings he was convinced he didn't need help with. He's struggling, she admitted almost reluctantly. It's like he forgot how to function on his own. That stung more than I expected, not because I missed him, but because it confirmed something I'd only started to suspect near the end. He hadn't just relied on me emotionally. He'd leaned on me professionally, socially, logistically, and then resented me for being the thing that kept him steady. His friends grew distant, not all at once, but gradually. The way people pull away when someone becomes exhausting instead of entertaining. Dinners turned into excuses. Group chats went quiet. The same people who once laughed at his jokes now exchanged looks when he talked too long, too loudly about how unfair everything was. He blamed the job. He blamed the stress. He blamed me. I didn't hear any of this directly from him. He never reached out again after I blocked him everywhere he could think of. But desperation has a way of traveling sideways. He asked people for my new number. He asked if anyone knew where I lived. Someone told me he'd even tried to look me up through work contacts, pretending he wanted to congratulate me. No one gave him what he wanted. By then, my life had filled up in ways that left little room for his shadow. I was busy learning new systems, contributing to projects that actually challenged me, meeting people who knew me as Gloria the engineer, not Frank's girlfriend. When I came home at night, the quiet still felt good, restorative. I didn't need to perform or justify how I spent my time. Then one evening, my phone rang with an Austin area code I didn't recognize. I stared at it longer than necessary, a familiar knot forming in my stomach. Part of me already knew. Another part hoped it was wrong. I answered anyway. Gloria Frank's voice said, breathless with relief, "Oh my God, you answered." My chest tightened. "How did you get this number?" "I'm in Austin," he said quickly, like he was afraid I'd hang up. "I flew down. I needed to see you." The audacity of it almost made me laugh. Almost. "I'm downstairs," he added. "Please, just 5 minutes." I closed my eyes. Somewhere deep inside, the last thread of obligation snapped. This wasn't about closure. It was about control, about proving to himself that he could still reach me if he tried hard enough. But curiosity is a stubborn thing. 5 minutes, I said. That's it. When I walked into the lobby, I barely recognized him. The polish was gone. No perfectly styled hair, no confident posture. He looked tired, smaller, like someone who'd spent too long convincing himself he was the victim of a story he'd actually written himself. He stood when he saw me, relief flooding his face, and for a split second I saw the man I'd once loved. Then he opened his mouth. I messed up, he said. That dinner, everything. I didn't mean it. I looked at him, really looked, and felt something unexpected. Nothing. The power he'd once had over me was gone, drained away by distance and clarity. Whatever came next, I knew one thing for certain: this wasn't going to end the way he imagined. We sat across from each other in the lobby, the space between us filled with everything that had gone unsaid for weeks. Frank kept glancing around like he was afraid someone might recognize him like this city. My city now wasn't meant to see him like this. I noticed how his hands fidgeted, how his voice wavered when he tried to sound confident. This was the man who once told me I'd come back begging. I was drunk, he said quickly, and insecure. That job offer made me feel small. I panicked. You didn't panic, I replied. My voice surprised me, calm even. You showed me what you thought of me. He shook his head. That's not true. I was showing off, trying to impress my friends. That makes it worse, I said. You humiliated me to feel important. He opened his mouth, closed it, then leaned forward. Everything fell apart after you left. There it was. Not an apology, a confession. My friends stopped calling, he continued, words tumbling out now. Work's been a mess. I lost the car deal. I had to move back in with my parents. I didn't realize how much you did for me until you were gone. I let the silence stretch. For once, I didn't rush to comfort him. I came here to apologize, he said softly, and to ask you to give us another chance. I could find a job here. We could start over. I studied his face, searching for the person he was claiming to be now. All I saw was desperation wearing the mask of growth. You don't miss me, I said. You miss what your life looked like when I was doing the work you took for granted. That's not fair. It's accurate. Tears welled in his eyes, and for a moment the old instinct to soften my words flickered. I extinguished it. You told me I'd be lonely here, I continued, that I needed you to be interesting. You were wrong on both counts. I love you, he whispered. No, I said gently. You loved being bigger than me. He reached for my hand. I pulled it back. Please, he said. People make mistakes. Don't I deserve a second chance? I stood. You told me I'd be back begging within a month. It's been 4 weeks. His face crumpled. And here you are, I finished. In Austin, begging. I turned toward the elevator, heart-steady steps sure. Behind me, his voice broke. You'll regret this. I glanced back once, not out of doubt, but out of finality. Start counting, I said. The doors closed between us. The elevator ride up felt longer than it was. Not because I was shaken, but because my body was finally catching up to what my mind had already accepted. That chapter was closed. Not paused. Not unresolved. Closed. By the time I reached my floor, Frank already felt like a memory from someone else's life. Something distant and strangely flat, like a story you once read too many times and no longer feel compelled to revisit. I didn't hear from him again after that. No dramatic follow-up, no last message asking for forgiveness or promising change. Just silence, the kind that tells you someone finally understands they've lost the right to speak. A few weeks later, I was tagged in a company announcement, Promotion Lead Engineer. I stared at the screen for a moment, half expecting that old voice in my head to tell me it was a fluke that I shouldn't celebrate too loudly. Then I remembered where that voice came from, and I muted it. I forwarded the announcement to my parents. They called immediately, pride thick in their voices, not because of the title or the salary, but because they could hear something different in me. Confidence without apology. Life settled into a rhythm that felt earned. Morning runs by the river, climbing trips with friends who didn't need me to be smaller so they could feel bigger. Late nights debugging problems that actually excited me. I didn't feel the need to prove anything to anyone anymore. The absence of constant evaluation was its own kind of freedom. One afternoon, a LinkedIn message popped up. Frank H. Saw your promotion. Congratulations. You were right about everything. I hope you're happy. I read it once. I didn't reply. I didn't block him either. I just closed the app and put my phone down. Not out of spite, out of indifference. Closure doesn't always come with a confrontation. Sometimes it arrives quietly disguised as disinterest. That evening, my phone buzzed again. A text from a friend asking if I was still on for the meetup. I grabbed my keys, stepped out into the warm Austin air, and let the door close behind me without a second thought. Frank had told me to start counting.